cross-functional dependencies of last mile. Joining us today to speak about that, Bill Catania, founder and CEO of OneRail. Bill, it's great to see you once again. How you doing, man?
Great to see you as well. Thank you for having me. Doing really well. Thank you.
Welcome, welcome. Let's talk about last mile. Now, clearly it is a mode of transportation, so when you're dealing with a shipper, it's like, I guess the question is, who do you deal with there? Do you just deal with the transportation team, or is it a number of entities that you deal with? So walk us through that. How does that work?
Well, it's funny because the irony is last mile is as old as the milkman, right? And the milkman goes back into the, I think, 1300s or something, a long time ago, before we had some of these other modes.
Right.
But no, you would think conventional wisdom would be we work with transportation, right? And we get everything done with transportation. What we found is it's exceptionally cross-functional. And what that means is, when we're building a last mile program, a lot of our customers have to get store operations involved because now we're pushing product out the front of the store. That's never been a thing. We also find there's a lot of involvement from like chief digital officer, chief customer officer, finance even gets involved. As we all know, last mile can be the most expensive leg of the journey. So getting unit economics right is very important. And yeah, transportation is part of that mix. I think for me, that was a surprise, coming into the space, just how cross-functional it really is.
Well, it's so very interesting because you're right. You would think that you're going to be dealing with that one entity, that transportation element, and yet supply chain, by its very definition, has multiple modes. And so there are multiple departments in any company that, as you say, are going to have a finger in the same pie. So you're going to have to deal with a number of folks, ideally, at a company. I mean, is that right? Do I have that right?
That's 100%. If you think about parcel, it's an age-old mode. It's very mature in terms of its process flow. How do you get a parcel labeled and out the door, of a retail or warehouse location? But when it comes to last mile courier specifically, it's just a whole different process flow. But a lot of times we're even finding it starts at the top. You're hearing boards of directors, CEOs, working with heads of strategy to figure out how do we get to a one-day or same-day delivery offering. And it starts at a strategic level. And then what happens is it filters down, maybe from the head of strategy into these various departments, and everybody has to have their finger on it. And that's one of the things that makes last mile difficult. It's also an opportunity because you're really helping companies with their transformation.
Now, when you talk about this working with this strategy officer, that sort of anticipates a question that I've just been turning over in my mind, and that is there a need in companies for a chief strategy officer? Does that person, do we need to have that kind of person, and why, if so?
Some companies, it's not commonly a C title, but it's no different than how supply chain, for many, many years, reported to the COO, and COVID was actually a turning point where you saw supply chain report in many cases now to the CEO as a chief supply chain officer, owning logistics as well. I am a big believer in the chief strategy officer role. There's a lot of EVPs of strategy, there's a lot of VPs of strategy, but you don't always see that C title. It really is, it becomes the arms and the legs of the board of directors and the executive team.
But regardless of the nomenclature, no matter what it is you call that person, you're saying that function is extraordinarily important. That person whose eye is on the strategy, of the company at all times.
They are the crucial connector between vision and execution. I feel like, and I've spent a lot of time with heads of strategy. A lot of our customers, a lot of our opportunities originated with a head of strategy. And they all do it a little bit differently, but ultimately there's an accountability to finance, there's an accountability, to the board. And then that telegraphs down in terms of sourcing and execution with the operators of the business. And we found that bridge to be super important.
Okay, so let's talk about practicalities. It's one thing to know that you need to talk with this, that, and the other department, right? Not just transportation.
Right.
All right, fine. Now you've talked to all these people. How do you get them all to be on the same, to utilize the same game plan? How is it what's the best practice for getting them all, to be cooperating and collaborating? marching forward together. How do you do that?
You really, there's no single way to do that, but there's an ideology, which is to unite them under the same metrics of where value will be unlocked. And a lot of times that's what's telegraphing up to the senior level of the company. So wanting to move from a 2-day to a same day delivery offering, looking at the cost to fulfill, how much OpEx can we save? So we go into kind of this value engineering solution consulting process where we put a lot of free consulting hours in. And that's where we're really working with each of those departments. We'll work with store ops to figure out how many touches does an associate have to get a product picked and then ultimately out the door to a courier. What does that cost today? How you're doing it pre-automation? What does it cost post-automation? And then we'll do that with all the different touch points of a last mile program. Once we put that value statement together and we say, look, we think the ROI could be this, that really unites those departments. And then we also find that we have to really be helpful in connecting some of those dots. We'll see that as we're talking, perhaps to the chief digital officer, hey, we need to bring in store ops. They need to know this is happening over here. So we're almost like a quarterback of the process. It's almost like we're running the process sometimes because it's so cross-functional, it even surprises our customers.
I find that interesting because you would expect that those kind of marching orders would come from the CEO to make sure that all the stakeholders, are working, together and marching together. And yet you're telling me it's the provider, that third party that is actually doing that kind of work, leading them, bringing them together. Am I right?
That's absolutely how we've approached it. Especially the opportunities we've had that have come from a senior level. You have that mandate, but then there's a lot of work and execution. And, you're dealing with teams that have a lot of priorities. So how do you help them? Well, our priority, number one, is to get this program, whatever that program is, to launch and start generating value. So
Right.
we become the urgency, behind that process. We drive that process.
Bill, let's bring this home because I know that viewers watching this thing are interested now in knowing something else about OneRail itself. So for the benefit of that one that does not really know the company, what's the focus of OneRail? What do you do?
We're a complete last mile fulfillment solution. I like to say we're Amazon in a box. Our customers don't have tens of billions of dollars to invest in warehouses. They don't have tens of billions of dollars to invest in a transportation network. So we leverage our customer, retailers, wholesalers, their inventory in their locations, and we've built a network of about 12 million drivers. We have the software that intercepts every single order they have, and then we decision on it to find its way to the right network provider to execute the delivery, whether it's a parcel delivery, courier delivery, and then we power that whole customer experience, track and trace, everything branded to the customer, right through to hopefully a happy smile when we hit the porch.
Well, if they take advantage of all the services you just mentioned, there will be that happy smile.
Thank you.
Bill, thank you for finding the time to sit down and speak with us today at Manifest. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Appreciate all you do.
Bill Catania, OneRail, speaking with us today about cross-functional dependencies in last mile. Thanks for watching.